Other demos?
I can demo on the AI train. Give me a second. So Richard and I were also playing around with AI, and we were trying to run queries or create queries in Omni using AI. And so I guess the simple prompt is, can we teach an LLM how to write an Omni query? Turns out we can. And so I was going to kind of walk through a bit of the process there, but instead I'm just going to jump into a demo because I think that's more fun. This is my local instance. And so let's start from new. So this is a first time query experience. You'll notice there's a few things new on the page here. One is this, you can ask any question you want of your data. And there's also these suggestions here. These suggestions look at your data model for this specific topic. So it'll say like, okay, distribution centers, inventory items, look at all your fields or all your dimensions and measures, and it'll try to come up with some interesting questions that you might want to ask of your data. So for example, this says inventory items available at each distribution center, helping monitor and manage inventory levels across locations. So let's give that one a try. And so not only did it come up with the question, it also actually crafted the query to answer that question. You can see that it's grabbing the right measures and right dimensions. And under the hood, it's not actually writing. I mean, you'll see some Omni SQL if you go to the SQL, but we decided not to write SQL and instead to actually create an Omni query here. And if we want to, what we can do is we can actually come up here and extend this. So like, let's say, filter this by inventory that was added in the last year. And obviously you could just do this through the UI and it would be faster. But it's going to think for a minute. It's going to look at your existing query. And then hopefully if the demo gods are kind to me, you'll see that it actually goes and creates the appropriate filter for you here and adjusts the results accordingly. So that's the first piece of the demo. And if we come back in here, we can start asking some more generic questions. And so I have a few that I've somewhat pre-screened, and we'll just see how this goes. So the first one I want to ask is, show me items that have been ordered the least. Just going to think for a minute. And this is somewhat helpful, but let's say I don't want the inventory item ID. Instead, I want the name. So show me the item name and not the ID. And it should be able to go and, again, update this query and give you a new result back. So yeah, now you can see here's the names, and let's add a filter here and say, show me items that have been ordered more than 5 times. Just to show off a little bit more of the filtering functionality. And then, yeah, there we go. So we added the filter, but now it's in the wrong sort order. So let's sort this by least ordered instead of sorting top to bottom. Think for a minute, hopefully get the right answer. So it looks like it blew away the filter there in that case. So it's not always perfect. Sometimes it might change things it shouldn't on the query. But it tends to actually be able to construct queries pretty successfully. So let's kind of maybe push this to the limit now. And let's ask the AI to show me inventory levels at each distribution center month over month for the past 2 years. So there's some filters in here. There's some pivots in here. And let's see if the AI can figure this out. Looks like it got it. So it has distribution center broken out month over month and inventory items as well. And you can update this if you want to. So you could say, instead of month over month, show me year over year. I would expect it to come back and replace the pivot on created at month with created at year instead. So it can be kind of a, oh, go for it.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What uh what is the context window here? Like field names, model? What are you guys actually using behind the scenes?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Um, I have a little slide here. The context we're passing in is the fields and measures on the current topic, so basically the views, and that shares the type, the field, the fully qualified field name, the type, whether or not it's an aggregate, what type of aggregate it is, if it's an aggregate. Then we also pass in sample questions, which I will actually show off in just a second. This is probably where we saw the biggest gains, where we can actually tweak the sample questions that we passed in. And then we also give it our entire filter syntax, like all of our TypeScript types, and some examples there, so it knows how to properly craft filters. And let me share my VS Code really quickly. On the sample questions, this was a fun exercise Richard and I did where we actually got on a whiteboard and we wrote out a bunch of questions. So like states that sold the most products, states that sold the most products in the last month, states that sold the most products over the last month that are over $50. And then we ran the query by hand in Omni and then copied out the data structure for that. So you can see here it has like fields, filters, limits, and sorts. And we did this for, I think, probably like 15 or so questions with pivots, all sorts of different types of filters, tons of fields in some of them, a few fields in other ones. You pass this in with the context window, so it knows kind of roughly what an Omni query looks like and what it can use to actually construct the query. Does that answer your question, Colin?
Yep.
Sweet. What else? There was a funny quirk where we found out that it really, really liked pivoting data. And when we originally trained it, we gave it of the first 10 questions or questions and answers. We gave it one example with one pivot, and it would come back and just be pivoting everything nonstop. And so we actually had to give it a lot more examples of like questions where almost actually the example that I showed here, where it would try to basically pivot everything. And we had to show it for questions like this. Actually, you only want to pivot one of the two possible pivots, and it was able to pick that up. Another thing was that it was heavily restricting the limit always to be 10. And that was because we accidentally, I just copy and pasted 10 in as the limit for like 4 or 5 examples. And so it just saw that and was like, oh, okay, limit is always 10 no matter what. So we had to, think more consciously about the limits and the examples as well. Yeah, and I guess some of the benefits that we actually originally tried doing this with SQL. And so we would try to generate SQL. So for example, we'd run like show me orders by each email domain. And it would say, oh, my model doesn't have an email domain field. So let me go and like literally try to write a alter table and run it. And that was kind of the moment where like, wait a minute, we need to stop using SQL and instead use the model to generate Omni queries, because that just puts up a ton of guardrails and makes sure that it's generating valid SQL, and it makes sure that you're staying within the bounds of what you have access to in that specific topic. That's it.
The alter table is
cool.
terrifying.
This is amazing.
Yeah. How reasonable is it to like put this up on Playground and Omni internal, like just to see? I mean, it's same question for the Vega thing. Like, I'm just sort of curious how launchable they are, like even in very, very raw form.
I think it would take a couple days. Just like the code is a hot mess, but it all works. So I think we just want to clean it up for probably 2 or 3 days, throw it on Playground, and yeah, we could play around with it.
Yeah. Because I remember the first cut that we did of the LLM thing when we tried to throw it up on internal, we couldn't ingest the whole data model. So it was struggling under the weight of that.
Yeah, we need to get on real data. So like putting it on Omni would be awesome, just to make sure, like as we contextualize it with, some of the topic information too, just to see, are we going to blow up the context windows, and sort of the number of tokens and stuff.
Like you might need to put a topic picker in front of it actually to make the context window small enough. But I'm just sort of curious. Obviously,
I
we
mean-
need to like constrain it too.
Yeah, there's a funny quirk in the demo, which you may have seen, is I have to actually click the topic that I'm using, or else it just doesn't work at all. And so I don't know if that's sort of what you meant, but
No,
you do-
that actually could be a good thing.
Yeah.
Because like part of it is just that we want to isolate the problem a little bit and see if it solves it in like the isolated case, and then we can sort of generalize it from there.
Yeah.
So like you meant, I'm obsessed with like the filter thing. Like I'm really curious whether we could make it so that you could just always type in text to filter, and like we just construct the filter for you. That would be very, very interesting to just use exclusively for a while.
Yeah, I actually have one more fun example that I was playing around with just this morning. So Richard's not here right now, but if he were around, I might like to ask him, how many jeans have you ordered in the last 2 years? And I thought this was a fun query because it's going to add a bunch of filters on time. It's going to also add a filter on Richard as well. Okay, well, I didn't select the topic. Let's select it and give it a shot. Dang, okay, so in this case, it thought you wanted product name, but you really want a product category. But this worked earlier as a fun little query that'll be able to pull out all sorts of different filters and names.
That is super cool too. And I think even just that like flub is sort of interesting where, you know, how can we provide better context to the LLM to be like, maybe it's indexing certain values and you know, sort of some of the RAG techniques and the like that sort of allow for, you know, us providing even more metadata about a column so that like we can say a category is comprised of these types of values or these example values if we don't want to do the whole thing, because it's gonna, but this is so cool.
Yeah, the one of the most surprising things is that it fails very infrequently. Like it might not produce the right result or pick the right field, but it tends to actually not just fall over and not be able to produce an Omni query very rarely, at least in the internal testing we've done.
I think this is really awesome. I think both demos are really awesome. Question, which LLM are we using? And then if we thought about this practically, would part of customer onboarding be that an analyst team go in and train this for, you know, N number of weeks? Like how many prompts did you guys put in to make this as accurate as it is? Like, because to me, this is what gets the product super sticky for a business user, is when, you know, your average salesperson can go in, use a chat interface to generate the, you know, the tables and the charts that they need. Like that becomes hyper sticky. So statement of awesomeness, and that goes for the Vega charts too. And I'm curious, like what's behind the scenes and what level of effort and like where would we see this becoming a part of an onboarding process?
Yeah, good questions. It's using ChatGPT 4.0, which I don't actually think is the best one for this anymore. I think Claude 3 is much better at code generation. And so there's like maybe some discussion, should we make it more generic so you can use different models? But right now, all like our infrastructure is pinned to ChatGPT. As far as the training data, there ended up being 12 examples to get this far. And yeah, I think the most challenging thing is, like, one thing is having the actual Omni query and the result, but then we needed to label it with what would the question to go along with it. And so like it would be great if you could just look at the last 10 queries or 20 queries someone did and shove those in the context window, but you don't necessarily know what natural language question they're trying to ask. So maybe there's some sort of labeling customers can do and then add that to the context window to train it.
Yeah, this would be a great thing, Greg, for maybe the bytecode and teams and
Totally.
partners, for them to like test this for us, and then they could package this together as like an offering, because they're already starting to do that. This is so amazing.
Yeah, super cool. How expensive do we assume this might get if we're using GPT-4? It got pretty expensive when we were at SourceGraph.
We're doing this very naively, and I would say it's like a few cents per query that you run right now. But the suggestions page is actually where it gets like pretty bad. We're jamming a lot more to the suggestions page, and so it takes almost like 30 seconds to load that without being cached. And then means like every time you load that blank screen, even if you don't ask a question, loading those suggestions is going to be like 20 cents or 30 cents.
Okay, cool. These are down the road problems as we think about margin and pricing and packaging, and this is awesome.
Yeah, we did talk about adding like an input where someone can put in their own credentials, their own keys for their whatever LLM they want to use to circumvent this problem.